So, welcome to episode 2, season 2. This episode, we're naming it Familial Toxicity, and it's something that was brought up by one of our listeners. And it's also something that we had just kind of been foreshadowing since the previous, um, even the previous episode when we were talking about just imposter phenomenon and how family could affect that. And then it's kind of like tying into a lot of different subjects that we had talked about in the past, and it'll unfold as we keep talking. So you'll see. But anyways, and it's also something that as we've done research, each one of us, and we've kind of discussed it, it's just something that everybody goes through, but it's not really spoken about.
Mm-hmm. So before we dive in, I did want to give a trigger warning just as we were researching, reading, having our own thoughts about all of this. It can be a really triggering conversation. And I did want to just provide the disclaimer that this is not a replacement for any type of therapy. If y'all have any questions about any medical, mental health treatments, then y'all should seek help. But this is kind of just something that we're just trying to open up the conversation about it. So that way everyone knows that they're not alone whenever we're experiencing any kind of familial toxicity.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we should just start by what does that even mean? I was glad that Nicole said toxicity first because that's a hard word for me to say unless I've heard it recently. So thank you, Nicole.
Wait, you want us to define it? One of us?
Yeah, I guess just kind of like, what do we mean? Or not define, but what is toxic family traits?
Okay, I guess I can do it. Oh my God, we're cutting all of this shit off. Okay, so if you just look up just toxicity in families, there's a bunch of articles that you can go through that pop up that have a lot of the same kind of examples. So we're going to list them all below as we usually do with our links. But some signs of toxicity include like cruel criticism, silent treatment, which is a form of manipulation, just lying, denying the truth, generalizing in a fight, such as like saying it never works out or you can always do this. Another good example is when parents pit children against each other, or like they create conflict between their children. Other ones are they make you feel bad for already feeling bad. So let's say you were hurt or you felt hurt about something that maybe happened during your childhood and you bring it up later as an adult because childhood affects you a lot. And their response is like, well, why can't you get over it? Or,
very
something along those lines. There's so many examples. Just basically like no matter what you do, it's not good enough. Like they keep like shifting the bar of expectation. Other ones are like passive aggression, gaslighting, which is something that we've talked about, ignore boundaries, which is also something that we've talked about. And then play the blame game. For example, always blaming others and like never taking responsibility for themselves or their faults. So I feel like that is just signs of toxicity in any relationship, but I think that you also need to realize as a person that even though it's family, like maybe people may dismiss it because it is family, so it's like their own blood, but you can't like deny that it's toxic.
Right. Like, would you put up with the same behaviors from a friend or a coworker or somebody else in your life who's not related by blood? And I think I feel like that's probably why it's not talked about maybe as much. Just because it is kind of like, oh, well, it's family, like suck it up. It's your family. Like blood is thicker than water. All of those sayings. And I mean, I understand family relationships can be very supportive, and I can understand if those can be supportive, It's a great thing to have in your life. If it's not, then it's not helpful. Then those relationships are actually hurting your health and they're not providing the same benefits of having that social connection, of having that supportive connection with someone.
Totally. I feel like, with family, it's almost like a past or it's just swept under the rug where it's like, well, at the end of the day, you always have your family. And it's like, well, okay, really though? Like, is that the type of, and I feel like even at a young age with children, that's kind of what we teach, where it's like, well, even like within, like for like siblings, I see with a lot of people with siblings where it's like, well, like that's your sister or that's your brother, like go on, give them a hug, get over it, where it's like, okay, well, that's not addressing an issue. That's not dealing with the problem. It's always a give family a pass because they're family. And it's like, well, it shouldn't work that way. Like there should almost be higher standards. Like,
right. Like there should be higher standards of, hey, don't treat your family that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even the sibling relationship one, you can have friends that you're closer to than siblings, it's just because you're related doesn't necessarily mean that there's an automatic closeness or an automatic attachment that just doesn't have to be fostered at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I feel like what I noticed even researching this, what kind of like blew my mind a little bit was anything really related to family toxicity. A lot of it just talked about like with childhood and like childhood trauma, how it affects your life later, as if it just like stops in your childhood and it's not something that continues in adulthood. And I think it's important for the listeners or anyone, it's like, yes, it does happen. I feel like it just kind of continues happening if it's never addressed, like even to adulthood, it doesn't just end. You can keep having these issues. They can come up from past issues and they could be new issues that keep snowballing into bigger problems.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Something that I read about a lot is just how not addressing these like toxic traits in your family just end up bleeding into obviously like your adulthood and within your own family. And just other relationships in general, right? Like friends or romantic relationships. So go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think there's a lot in that statement, even about just, because it's what you grow up with in your family kind of becomes your norm. And so, what if your norm is the fact that your parents never respected your boundaries ever? And so now you're in these adult relationships where you're just kind of okay with people never respecting boundaries, or maybe you kind of have like really porous boundaries and you just can't set boundaries for yourself. Or just, boundaries were never even really talked about in your families. And I know I talk about boundaries a lot, but there's even other examples too of just like maybe the norm in your family was yelling and name calling, whenever you got in a fight, and now you're in adult relationships and it's like, hey, that's not other partners or other friends are like, hey, that's not okay for you to call me stupid every time we're in an argument. And it's unpacking kind of some of those things of what that norm was and how much that was just a norm in your family, and actually how unhealthy that can be in relationships. Not to say that there's like always, I feel like the line here is always like, I cannot say exactly what a healthy family looks like, right? Healthy can look differently in different situations, but I do think that there's some qualities that are the same. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like there's foundational qualities that are the same.
I think that's something super important that you guys have touched on, just saying that like that we make it acceptable maybe in our heads. Well, like the general we, right? Because it's family, and then it becomes a new norm. And then and I just wonder like how okay, never mind, scratch that. I was gonna say like how you
I want to know.
Well, I'm just like trying to think. I'm just trying to like if it's the new norm or not the new norm, like if it's just a norm that's been going on in your family since you were small, so it's like the only thing that you've known, how do you unpack that? Like how, like what? I don't know.
Like how do you, go ahead, Jazz.
Oh, sorry. Like how do you start to see what's healthier and what's like a better way to deal with something. Like, is that kind of what you're trying to get at? I see. I feel like sometimes it's just being almost exposed more, like being around other people's families, or even just seeing different friend dynamics where you're like, well, wait, usually when I'm in this situation, this is what I'm used to, but now I'm seeing something else, and this is a better way than what I'm like used to or what I've seen before. Maybe I should try this. Or I feel like even sometimes it's just that feeling of like, this feels icky. And when I notice this happening, I prefer this method better.
Or even just, I think all of those, yes. I think that was what I was thinking, is seeing other relationships and kind of recognizing what the differences are between those relationships and maybe how we are in certain relationships, or what was the norms that we grew up with. And I do also think, I kind of lost that thought. The other hard. I know. I do think the other part of that may be also just like, maybe you've done something in relationships over and over again and it's kind of keeps not working. And I don't think that that's necessarily always on us. Like, that's not always on just one person, but it is kind of recognizing like, what am I contributing to this that's not working? I think sometimes that helps us evaluate ourselves more.
Like a self-reflection. True. One of the things I had looked at is talking about like just the effects in dealing with this type of toxicity, and how this one was more geared towards obviously like childhood and growing up, but it was showing kind of like the latent effects of this, where it's like, because your boundaries weren't respected, you end up having a hard time saying no to something, or being like, I don't want to do that, or you end up developing more anxiety, or you can't really be yourself because you've been told you need to be this, or this, or if you act this way, this person's going to have a problem with you, or this now upsets them. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, my mind is.
No, exactly. And I think even just not necessarily even with the boundaries, but also just like, if you, let's say that you were a kid growing up in a household where you were kind of, Nicole mentioned this earlier, blamed for a lot of things, or, you know, shamed if you did one thing wrong. It was kind of like, you're a stupid kid, like you keep messing up, you can't do anything right. Then I think the message that goes into adulthood is always being fearful of making a mistake, or if you're making a mistake, like profusely apologizing, like just like pleading to make sure. That can be one of the, I guess, avenues that this can be seen, but just pleading to make sure that people are staying in those relationships with you because you're fearing the loss of those relationships. And I think that's like, whenever I talk about those foundational qualities of families, it's knowing that and I'm thinking about parent-child just because those are usually the really big ones. But just knowing that to your parents, you always feel like you belong and you're always accepted and you're always loved. I mean, knowing just those things in general is pretty necessary in any kind of relationship. And I think whenever you're blamed a lot, or whenever you're ignored, whenever you're left, neglected, whatever it may be, you don't receive those messages. And so you kind of internalize that, because kids developmentally are egocentric. And so we kind of think everything is our fault at that age. And so we grow up thinking that we did those things and we deserved it. And so I think a lot of the work that it takes as an adult is speaking to those, that what I like to call like kind of your inner child, and talking to your inner child about the fact that like that wasn't your fault. And parents are also just humans that make a bunch of mistakes. And for some reason, parents think they don't have to apologize for those, which is interesting, but they should apologize. Parents aren't always right.
I feel like what you said was like a big thing about like parents are also humans are, sorry, I can't remember what you just said.
That was part of it.
I feel like with all like with any family thing, it's hard because it's like when your feelings are hurt, it's hard to remember like that person is also human. Mm-hmm. And it's also knowing, you know, it's like, okay, if there's going to be a change, it's got to be both sides. And sometimes that change just might not happen. Like some family dynamics are just toxic. Some people can't see the hurt that they're doing, or they see it, but they don't care. It means nothing to them. And sometimes the way to deal with it, I'm not saying is to not deal with it, but it's just to kind of come to an understanding, and that could be maybe see them less often, maybe not talk to them. I mean, that sounds kind of drastic, but it just depends on what you're dealing with. And this one lady, she had wrote a blog, and her big thing in letting go of a family member was she was like, I had to know that when I let that person go, I was going to get a lot of fallout from other family, but that was a risk I was willing to take to make my life more positive, was knowing I may lose some other people as just collateral, unfortunately. And that for her, she was saying like, she kept beating herself up over and over, being like, why could it just not work out with this person? And she was like, at the end of the day, I had to realize there is no justification for this negativity, the toxicity, how this person acted. So I'm not going to try to find the why, just know that I don't want to be around them. And I'm like, her coping mechanism was just, I don't want to be like them. I don't want to turn into that. And so I'm just going to remove myself and just better my life. And sometimes that's unfortunately like the road you have to take. Like,
right. And I think, like you said, there's steps of maybe I can see them less often. Maybe I can only see them in certain contexts. I think that you can have some boundaries there and kind of reevaluate those. But also, if none of those boundaries are being respected or none of those are working enough for your own mental health, for your own state, then yeah, I mean, it does go to that next step of maybe I just need to not have you in my life right now. Maybe that's forever. Maybe that's for a few years while I kind of work through this. Like, it can always change, but I think that is what it has to go to sometimes, which is unfortunate, but true. And not anything that people have to feel guilty about. I mean, I know we feel guilty all the time without needing to feel guilty, but if parents have hurt you, that's on them.
Something that I just kind of remembered while you guys were talking right now about, how to kind of deal with this is, and just kind of answering my question from before of like, how are you able to like recognize this? Because I think it's really easy to take anything. I don't know, like there's so many red flags, right? So I think it's just like recognizing that, but then also something else that you can do, because sometimes actions and words from other people you can't necessarily justify it as a red flag, but the way to recognize that it is toxic to you personally is probably realizing, like maybe you just like dread any sort of interaction with this person, like no matter the occasion. Like if you recognize that feeling, then like that's a sign, right? Because it's like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a very distinct red flag that they're doing or whatever, but maybe just like the emotion that you get. And just like, I think the way that people make you feel is like the biggest indicator, right?
Even just like let's say for the holidays, right? The holidays just happened. After spending time with family. I mean, I understand being exhausted just from like a social battery being drained. So there's that, but then there's also, am I just like ragged from how exhausting that was? What is my self-talk like? Like, am I beating myself up more? Am I more anxious? Am I more sad? Like kind of doing just that check-in with yourself of like, how am I feeling after spending XYZ amount of time or doing XYZ with them? Because I understand that not every interaction is always positive, but if there's a trend that's always you're feeling worse after every interaction, then it is a good chance to kind of evaluate like, okay, maybe this isn't actually helpful for me. And like, am I doing this because they're expecting me to, or am I doing this because I want to?
That's a good point, Nicole. I didn't even think about that, of like just kind of doing a self-check where it's like, it may not be a bullet point of, oh, here's what they're doing wrong, but it's just that self-checking in where it's like, this is kind of giving me like a lot of anxiety leading up to this. And I feel like, it's like those certain people you recognize are just, what's the term? It's like energy vampires, where they just suck the life out of you. And it's so draining being around those people where you're like, I can't.
I hadn't heard that before, but I like that.
I'm just giving that example because personally, I feel like sometimes people are saying something, for example, and I take it a certain way, but maybe the person next to me doesn't take it that way. But in the end of the day, it's really how you feel, right? And so that's why I'm saying like it's good to do that self-check. Because it might not be like blatantly obvious or something that you can like justify, but if at the end of the interaction you're like you feel whatever, exhausted or just not good about yourself or anxious, then I don't know, I feel like that's reason enough. Something else that I was reading about a lot that you guys had already brought up is just how to deal with it. And I feel like that's the hardest part, right? Because the worst thing that you could do, or not the worst thing, but like the most serious thing that you could do is just like sever that relationship, right? Just like no more communication.
Yeah, kind of final step.
And then other things that you can do is just like have a conversation, which
is so hard.
Yeah, I just feel like that's even harder.
It is hard. It is. I feel like especially, and see, I don't know. We always make the joke with other therapists that like we always answer things with it depends, but it really does depend so many times on like what the context looks like. Because I think if you are in a relationship with someone in your family and let's say that they do things that cross your boundaries or they do things that hurt your feelings, but it in a way it almost feels safe, like you can still have that conversation with them, like if you believe that maybe that change can happen. And I say that, I don't know, I feel like there's probably a better way to word that because I don't even think we always believe change can happen because I think that they're always going to be that way, but people can change. And I don't know how to explain exactly how you would know that in those relationships, but giving that, if it's worth the shot, maybe like if it's worth it to have them in your life, if the outcome is, if I could have a healthy relationship with this person, I want them in my life, then it's worth having that conversation with them. If it is something that has never felt safe, like if they have always shut you down or, you know, there's a lot of like name calling, shaming, humiliation, you know, I think just like any kinds of emotional abuse signs, then that's a way harder time to have a conversation that way. You know, I don't know if I would always recommend having that conversation or just kind of setting the boundary of like, hey, I need to have a break for you from at least a few months while I kind of work through some stuff. Maybe longer. We'll reevaluate.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost that internal dialogue with yourself where you're like, okay, if I talk to them, are they going to be receptive to what I say? Are they going to understand where I'm coming from and know that I'm not trying to attack you? I'm just saying this is how I felt. Or is it like, okay, they're going to dismiss my feelings. They're not going to get it. It's going to blow up and be a bigger fight. So never mind. And then time passes by and you're like, should I just say something? No, forget it. Well, let me say it now. Like, and then it's like, well, why should I bring it up? It happened so long ago.
Because it affected you. I feel like you have
It's hard. It's hard to just be like, I'm gonna just go for it.
Yeah. It is. I think it, especially like you said, Nicole, if it's affecting you still, you know, I think it's, oh, so this reminds me of a metaphor that I heard the other day. And I think that this is actually really, I don't know, fitting, I think, whenever we're talking about things like this. But let's say that I'm holding my hand open and someone pours salt in my hand. And I'm kind of like, okay, that's random. I don't know why you did that, but whatever. Like, it doesn't do anything to me, right? I'm kind of just like, sure, thanks for the salt. But let's say I have this like big fresh gash on my hand, you know, this like huge open wound, and someone pours salt on my hand. Like, my immediate reaction is I want to punch you in the throat because that was super hurtful. But that's the difference, right? Like, it hurts because I have a wound there. If I don't have a wound there, it's not as hurtful to me. And so I think that's the balance in all of this is we cannot always depend on other people not pouring salt wherever they want to pour salt. But what we can control is what wounds we can heal. And then we can choose, like, am I able to take the salt that you're pouring on my hand now, or do I want to just walk away from you because this is still not a helpful relationship for me? Because I think, I know we can work through some of those like very deep inner child hurts, but those are very real and they do affect us and they have to be addressed. But it's also, yes, even if it was done by family, it's now our responsibility to work through them. We can't, that's giving them too much power if we're wanting them to fix it for us, because obviously they're not doing a very good job at that.
Yeah, it's like that saying where it's like you can't control other people's actions, but you can control your reaction. And not meaning like, oh, just don't be hurt, but just like,
right.
Okay, well, this happened. What am I going to do about it now? What's my next step to like move forward and be okay with myself in the situation?
Right. And in no way am I saying it's okay that parents, family, whatever are doing these things. It's not. It's definitely not acceptable. But I also think if, like I said, parents are also human. And so maybe sometimes, maybe they're not aware of what exactly they're doing and they're just trying their best. And so it's kind of, I don't know, taking a grain of salt with both of those things and kind of working through your own stuff while also setting those boundaries with them of whatever is most helpful for your mental health. What do you think, Nicole?
Nothing. I'm just like trying to work through this in my head. No, yeah, obviously everyone's human. Everyone makes mistakes. Everybody has those days. Just kidding.
Should we insert Miley Cyrus into this right now? Just give us a little break.
I'll try to edit it. Anyways, no, I feel like, of course, everyone's human and like you have to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? But what if you're just in a situation where the person knows what they're doing, right? And you know what they're doing and they know. And then like, how can you address that?
I feel like that's hard because I feel like, I mean, this sounds harsh. Some people, they're just kind of evil and they just kind of like want to be that way. And like, they are not like, they themselves probably have so much hurt and so much in them that they act that way. That's their norm. They don't care to better themselves or better the situation. That's just how they choose to go through life. And with people like that, it's hard because it's like they have to work on themselves. Like there's something within them that they've really got to, some deep rooted problems.
Right. And I think that's whenever we get to look, because I think whenever we're talking about like, oh, well, they're human, people make mistakes. That's a lot of understanding, but that doesn't make it okay. And I think that's whenever we go back to the fact that like they have things they need to work. They need to get it together and work on their stuff because it's not okay that they're using their hurts as an excuse to hurt someone else. And so it's like they have to do their own work too, right? Like it's not just on us to do our own work. Like people got to do their own work. And if they don't, then it's kind of like, well, then you're going to get the relationship that you get because you haven't done that work within yourself. And so I don't want to put myself in a relationship with someone who's not doing that work.
And it's a struggle when it's like a huge imbalance. What is grammar? When it's a huge,
I wouldn't know.
imbalance like that of like, maybe you want something better. Sometimes you just don't want the closure for you. And sometimes needing that closure is like for them to do better and be better. And it's hard knowing, okay, I'm just not going to get that. And yeah, you're still, I just feel like sometimes it's one of those things where it's like, you keep being like, okay, well, maybe they'll finally grow up a little. Well, maybe this will finally happen. You're like, maybe it's just not going to happen. Maybe that imbalance is just there. And I know for me, that's something I haven't really figured out. And I feel like there's definitely tips I've seen where I'm like, okay, well, I'm still just not going to try it because I know I'm certainly not ready to do certain things. It's hard. I feel like trying to grow from something or do something, it requires a lot of hard work that person might not be ready for. And I know maybe like on my end, I haven't been ready for. So it's like, well, it'll just be a stalemate for the moment.
I think the hard thing is just like coming to terms that maybe the other person doesn't want to do the work within themselves and, with you, and just accepting that. I think that's the hardest thing. And then at that point, I feel like you need to learn emotional intelligence. It's like, I don't know. Well, especially like with this situation, just like maybe be like physically there, but like emotionally detached.
That just doesn't sound like a healthy situation to put yourself in, though.
I know, but then, like, what if you don't have a choice?
Yeah.
Like, what if the person is not willing to do the work, and like, it's not like you can sever that tie. So it's someone that you have to like keep seeing in your life.
Mm.
I don't know. It's just a thought.
I think, yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, if there's not really the option, maybe to not see them as much. I think then it's also a lot of like reminding, like whatever's coming up within you in those interactions, like giving yourself something to kind of work on in those interactions too. Like, and I don't know exactly what, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, let's say, for instance, it's bringing up thoughts of like either self-doubt or like there's something in me, like I'm not feeling good enough with this person in interactions. Then if I have to be around them, I'm going to make sure I'm going to kind of like mentally prep myself to be like, I am enough. Like, no matter what they say, this is not truth. They do not speak over me. They do not know me. I am my own person. I am strong. I am brave. I am courageous. Like, I know what I'm doing. I know myself better than they know me. I don't know, just kind of building up your mental state more. Because I think whenever we lean towards dissociating, it gives your mind a mental break, but it's also not helping you face whatever's coming up in you. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
I feel like what you just said reminded me of The Help.
Yes.
I
think of it all the time.
You was smart, you was important. And it's true, you got to be like your biggest cheerleader and just be like, whatever, like hush all this noise out. Like, I know who I am. I know what I have to offer. I know the type of person I am. And just.
Yeah. And, I think like, especially whenever we're talking about family toxicity, like, however their best of loving me is, there's a better way to word that. Like, whatever their best love is not how I deserve to be loved. Like, I am worthy of more love than what they are capable of giving. And that's just that. But that doesn't make me less lovable or less worthy just because they're not capable of doing that. No one can see, but we're all just staring at each other.
Deep thoughts.
Well.
So we've been talking a lot about how to kind of deal with this. For example, if you can't sever ties with a family member. So what are other things that you can do?
So I think ones that I've liked recently, especially just since there's been a lot coming up. I mean, the whole world is in discord, right? Like, I mean, there's a bunch of disagreements all over the place. Family is definitely no exception just politics is really the only one that comes to mind. But even like whenever someone presents something that they feel like is fact or opinion or, how they're feeling or something, you can say things that kind of avoid having that conflict or avoid having that conversation. And it's kind of just like a little bit of like a conversation ender. So you can say things like, okay, well, that's interesting. Or, oh, okay, well, you might be right about that, but I would have to read more about it. You can say, let's see, I'm trying to think of other ones.
So in a way, it's like you're not technically engaging in the conversation, but you're like acknowledging that they did say something.
Yes, exactly. So it's kind of saying like, okay, I get where you're coming from. Or like, all right, I hear that. And not like, I'm not agreeing with you, but I'm also just kind of not engaging.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of just not engaging, I guess, as much, which I think is a little bit, and I don't know if this is what you meant earlier, Nicole, whenever you were saying like being physically there, but then just not really emotionally invested. I think this is a good way to kind of be physically there and then not emotionally invested, because it's, if I'm not going to change your mind and you're not going to change my mind, then we're just going to live in this like place of conflict, because maybe that's what you bring a lot, not you, but like other people bring this a lot. It's kind of saying like, okay, then I just like, okay, that's interesting. Like, I get it. I hear you.
Mm-hmm. Just going back to that, you said that it's not a healthy like coping mechanism or just like a healthy way to approach the situation. But I almost feel like it would be necessary, at least for me. Like I feel like before I can address anything, I have to like compartmentalize, right? Like I have to like detach and then be able to know that, okay, I can do that. Like this person is telling me something, but I'm not like, I don't feel anything, right? And then be able to just actually like address it in my head, where then it becomes like, okay, like I'm hearing what they're saying, but whatever, I know I'm better, or like find a way to not let it affect you.
Yeah. So to me, that sounds different than what I was thinking earlier whenever you were talking about it. Because I think like emotionally detaching in the way of like, okay, I hear her words or whoever's words, and I'm just gonna, okay, that I'm gonna let that roll off my back. I know it's true, and just be like, okay, I hear ya. And just not let it hit you, kind of like if you're wearing armor and you're just like letting the little bullets like hitch off of you like Superman or something. Yeah, like ting, ting, ting. Like, all right, you're not hitting me. So that I feel like is healthy in the way of like, it's not affecting you and you're not you're not reacting to it. I think in my mind, whenever I heard you say that earlier, I was thinking like straight dissociation. Whenever you're like taking a mental vacay, you're like on a beach somewhere in your mind and you're not like mentally present whatsoever, which is something like that's what we all do whenever we zone out, is that's like dissociating. But I think so all of us do it to a certain degree. It's just not usually like the healthiest form of coping if we're doing it a lot. But what you're saying is no, that makes sense. And I think that is a good way of kind of dealing with things whenever you don't maybe have a whole lot of other options.
So emotional intelligence.
Sounds like maybe that's what's coming up next. Y'all, this was a hard episode. I think in the way that it's hard because it brings up a lot. All of us have been hurt as children, every single one of us. And one, all of those things are valid. Two, all of those things have not been addressed for all of us. And this is just a really triggering conversation. And so I think it's hard for us to talk about. Two, it's hard probably for people to listen to. And I think that if I could just say any takeaway, like no matter what families you've grown up in, no matter what families you're in now, like you are worthy, you belong, you are loved. Like those are the things that are most important. And those are the things that need to be told to yourselves over and over. And, this is us navigating a really difficult conversation. So I'm sure it'll be interesting for everyone to listen to. But I would honestly love to hear, I know we say this at the end of every episode, but I would really love to hear everyone's thoughts, just because I think there's a whole lot that can come from this. Emotional intelligence is one of them. That goes with it.
Just to add on with what you said, I think that it is important to tell yourself that you're important and you're loved. And maybe it's not through your family, but also maybe a way to, like cope with familial toxicity is just, you didn't choose these people, right? To be your family. And so like maybe find comfort in the fact that you can choose people, right?
Yeah. Find your family, like create a family, create your community.
Choose to surround yourself with positive, uplifting, caring people.
Yeah.
And choose to do the work.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was gonna just like choose to do the work. Like choose to not let them have that power to hurt you. Like choose to kind of heal some of those things, which is tough, as we've also said.
I was gonna say, let's end this on a happy note since this was so hard.
Anyone got anything?
I don't know. Is there something you guys are looking forward to, or something that's, I don't know, bringing you happiness?
It shouldn't be this hard.
Y'all, if y'all need someone to love you, get a dog. That's whatever you said is something like I cuddled with my dog this morning and it's beautiful. Or I think that's even more positively than that. Nicole, you have had a child in this past year. Like you get to be an adult that recognizes these hurts and fixes them for the child that you're raising. You know what I mean? Like you get to be better and like create better. And that's huge.
Yeah.
And that's exciting because you're actually doing the work. You're talking about all of this. You're having the hard conversations. You're facing it.
Snaps for being a mom.
Neither Jazz and I aren't brave enough to do that.
I'm like, give me another 10, 20, 30, 40.
50, 60, 70 in the background. Just goes off. I love my dogs.
I feel like that's how you think, right? Because before I had a baby, that's what I thought. Like, okay, I'm not ready. But then you have your baby and like,
is anyone
something
really
just
ready
like
for that? Yeah. Huh? I said, is anyone really ever ready for that? Like,
no, I don't think there's ever like a perfect time.
No, but I think that's also the important thing too, is like, I think we were raised by generations that like didn't think that you could apologize to children because like you always had to be like the authority figure. But I think now we're starting to understand that. And I mean, I think I've understood this just in trainings I've done. I obviously haven't had my own kids to learn this with, but even just like whenever things happen, like whenever ruptures in the relationship happen, whenever hurts happen, because they're going to, because we're people and we get hurt, but you're able to go in and say, I'm sorry, and repair that hurt. And then your relationship is better. You know what I mean? Like you can grow from those things. And so I think it gives you so much hope because it's like, no, none of us are ever going to be perfect or fully ready, but you're still able to create hope and create that connection.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
Sorry, I'm like, I hear the baby.
Speaking of,
I'm distracted.
So emotional intelligence is next.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hope y'all enjoyed this episode. Reach out to someone y'all love if you need to talk to anyone. Shoot us any comments.
Just a final thought. I don't feel like we even I feel like we hit like the top of the iceberg, right? Like we talked about some examples and like maybe like some ways to cope with it. So I would definitely encourage you guys to email us or like send us a message and tell us if you feel like there's more that we could have addressed.
Yeah, maybe we could do part 2 if we need to. But this is, there's no way we can address all of this in 45 minutes. Not that easy.
Until next time.